Okay. I'm gonna start getting this thing kicked off over here. So yeah, just a little official welcome. Thank you everyone for making some time today to come out and spend some time with us. Hopefully you enjoy this. It's going to be a little more on the casual end. We want to have some banter. We want to go back and forth. We don't want this to be too stuffy, too formal. And that goes along with your comments in chat and anything you want to bring up in the Q&A. Please feel free to just put it out there. Feel free to have some open-ended chats with us as well too. We have 4 presenters really today, so if there's something you want to bring up in chat, there's always going to be someone that can kind of ping back and forth and get back to you on something. So today's little meeting, it's going to be called I Downloaded a Virus and What Do I Do? And this is where we're going to throw John Brennan into it to figure out what to do in this kind of scenario, which is something that I think a lot of people have found themselves in when they've downloaded something or clicked on something that they didn't know, and just led to a series of events from there. So let's get started. First things first, let's have a little bit of an intro. Greg, I'll hand it off to you and then I'll talk a little bit more about myself.
Yeah, so again, thank you for everybody making the time to show up to our webinar. We really appreciate it. A little bit about me. The majority of my career was spent between the United States Air Force as an intelligence analyst, and I started off doing signals collection from air platforms, the U-2 and the Global Hawk, and I primarily supported anti-air kind of intelligence, early warning, missile defense and things for air assets, being in the Air Force. And then I transitioned into cyber, or more specifically offensive-based cyber. And I got my break into cyber because there was a door open to a classroom and they were teaching, some comp sci theory and some things like that. And I, under my breath, said, that's not how that works. That instructor's wrong. And I was essentially talking shit about that course. And right behind me was the officer who, ran that course, and he turned around and said, "Could you do better?" And being cocky, I said, "Yes." And I found myself in the class the next iteration, and by the time it was done, they asked me to join their team, and then I supported teaching everybody who deployed to Afghanistan or Iraq to support cyber-based intelligence operations. And then I pivoted out of the government space by doing a startup, Level Effect, and made my way here and met these fine individuals. And we'll throw John into there. We'll include him too.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Greg. A little bit about myself. I'm actually I'm not from a traditional security background originally. I was working in luxury hotels and operations for some time before I discovered this calling to the security space. I found myself in more of a senior risk management position later on in hotels. That's what kind of curtailed everything and kicked off my interest. So I spent a couple years doing that and really analyzing and improving compliance and policy and enforcement of operations and standards and so forth as well too. And then I made a pivot more into the more hard technical side of things and did some studying, got myself more into IT administration at first, and then moved more into consulting, and then ended up doing some pen testing as well. And then I found myself over here working with Level Effect and just building out our platform. I'm OSCP and Network Plus and Security Plus certified, and looking forward to always learning and growing and teaching what I can. And let's give a little intro to Mr. John Brennan over here as well.
Perfect. Well, as you may have heard, my name is John Brennan. I've been in the cyber industry for about a year now, and as far as an actual career goes, I built my first computer when I was 14, and from there I fell in love with computers. And since then, I have gone through multiple boot camps. Level Effect especially was my favorite to go through. That was about a 3-month experience roughly, and it's prepared me for where I am today, and I've loved it ever since. I'm not really sure where my cyber career is going to take me. Right now I'm a threat analyst at Huntress Labs. It's an amazing job. I work with amazing people, and I'm happy to be here, honestly. Nothing too extraordinary about myself. I'm just going to be doing some live triaging for you today.
Awesome.
Thanks, John. Good stuff. So a little bit of the flow for today. So we're gonna talk a little bit about us, what we're doing at Level Effect. We've talked a little bit about who we are, so we're gonna get into Level Effect itself. We're gonna go over some of the recent breaches and some interesting industry incidents that are happening right now. Some really interesting things actually happening. There's a bit of a shift right now in security incidents and what's going on and the magnitude and occurrence, etc. So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the landscape, look at some of the open jobs out there and talk about what we're actually sort of doing as an industry to solve some of these problems. We'll cover some of the pro tips of what you can do and maybe what you might expect to handle when you have some of these incidents happening. And then we're going to kick it off over to John, and he's going to demonstrate some of his kung fu and just wow and impress all of you while Greg and I grill him and see if he can really hold up to it.
Just like class all over again.
Yeah, man.
It's like a
Loving
live
it.
class.
Works for me.
Awesome. Cool. So, us at Level Effect, we actually did start off originally as a software development company. So the first sort of foray into this whole scene is we had built this EDR solution called Recon, sort of like a network aware monitoring agent that would look at different heuristics and data and endpoints inside of the network and aggregate them into hopefully being able to anticipate all of these security incidents before they even happen. So kind of putting all of the knowledge and best practices, mainly from Greg and Rob's head into practice on the network from all their experience and exposure, and do something pretty wonderful about it, and hopefully do something different that's not actually being done with all these EDR agents. And for those that aren't really familiar with that term in the audience, when I say EDR, I'm talking about sort of like an advanced antivirus, if you will. And that's sort of what it's doing with a little bit more firepower. Then we had developed this boot camp over here afterwards. We actually had the EDR solution acquired. And Greg, I don't know if you want to maybe talk a little bit more about that and then maybe segue into the boot camp itself as well.
Yeah, thank you. So we developed this capability, and we were really looking at, how do we get this to market, and how do we, create the best product for the market that needs it the most. And we had sort of identified that these small, medium businesses would best be served by this capability, because traditionally enterprise security products are really, really expensive, and the complexity to deploy them, to install them, to configure them is well outside the reach of many organizations. And it really just worked out that there was another group of people who had the same mentality, came from the exact same places at the NSA that we did. Rob worked with them. And these are the folks that started Huntress Labs, which I know we have quite a few of you guys here in the chat, which is awesome to see you. And it just sort of really worked out that they had the same mission, the same drive, the same ethos and ethics around like what is good security and how do we move forward doing the right thing for our customers. And Rob and I, had a discussion like, this is the way forward. So with that, we sort of joined forces with that technology. So I find myself full time at Huntress, and coincidentally, this webinar is on my lunch break. So that's how I'm sort of managing my day to day. But due to COVID and what that did for, many working professionals, there's many, of course, who lost opportunities to work, which is unfortunate, but there was a lot of people who did get to keep their jobs. The cyber community, fared much better than many others. And one of the big things that came out of that from our connections was a lot of people looking for training. We had a lot of people at home looking to fill those gaps and upskill staff. So having a strong background in training and education that I did working at the agency as well as working operational mission, we put together this boot camp, and we decided, I think it was in like the first couple weeks of April, so about a year now, our anniversary year. So the first week of April, and our first class was July 6th. So we built a virtual learning platform. We built a 13-week, 3-month-long curriculum very, very quickly. Probably the worst 2 months of my life leading up to that, just the amount of work and stress we were under. But it's paid off. We were recently identified as a top-rated best cybersecurity bootcamp by Course Report. So it's nice to see our efforts and continue to move forward. And the long skinny of it is we're trying to do the best that we can to make it as accessible as we can to those who need to do it, who want to get in this industry and change things for the better.
Mm-hmm. Nicely said, Greg. Yeah, I think a lot of that what we're doing.
It's almost like I lived it.
Yeah, sort of.
It came from the soul, man.
It really did. You couldn't script that if you tried.
No, I'll never be able to say that again twice.
No, so let's just record that, and that's going to be the intro to future things. Awesome, thanks. Yeah, so let's move a little bit more as well now. Talk a little bit about the cyber industry. So we have this boot camp, right? And maybe let's talk a little bit about what sort of impact that might have and what we're trying to solve as well. And let's look at some of the numbers. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this in your LinkedIn feeds or just opening up your news and looking at different feeds. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the cybersecurity industry is booming, lots and lots of vacancies. We're looking at potential rates of 7 billion plus. I think the number might be, it's probably even more right now, of how many incidents happen in the overall worldwide cost. I'm sure that number is going to be higher actually. And then just the number of vacancies of positions out there, because I think a lot of the initial conversations people are having is, well, we need more people, we need more resources, we need more people to detect and sort of identify these things from happening in the first place, so that we don't end up with this $7 billion deficit. How do we bring that down? And I think we've been doing that over the past couple of years. There is more of a supply of cybersecurity professionals entering the market. They're applying to jobs. They're getting out there. You know, John just joined up, right? He went through the boot camp, and then he's out there in the field now. He's doing what these numbers are trying to put out there. He's trying to solve that problem with us. But we're still seeing a lot of that increase go up, right? There's still more incidents happening. And I think at some point, some larger conversations have to take place about more like larger solutions. But the more immediate solution is we definitely need more resources. We need more people out there that are skilled. And there is a little bit of a disparity, right? You know?
Yeah. And I would add that, you know, a problem that is talked about a lot, but it doesn't really get the light that I think it needs, is that when we think about why is there disparity in numbers and what are people trying to hire, if you're new to cybersecurity or you're in it and you're trying to get your next job or you're trying to, you know, move up, it's proving challenging because, you know, I've been doing this for 17 years, and if I randomly open up a job posting, I'm more than likely not qualified for it based on like the ridiculous amount of things that it's asking for. And that's really a symptom of an underlying problem about, you know, how businesses are managing their risk, right? Like if a business is hiring more people, it's because they're dealing with more risk. They are getting hacked more. Their users love those cat pictures, so they're clicking those emails and they're getting ransomware and all of these other terrible things being brought into their network. So they try to solve that with people and technology. And the problem is they have a quantified risk on one hand and an unknown candidate in the other. So it creates this dynamic where hiring managers are saying, oh my God, please, can I find me a unicorn? Can I find somebody who's a DevSecOps security engineer who can reverse engineer malware, who can write C# and Python and do all of these wonderful things for $55,000 junior starting position? And it's like that doesn't exist. You just described, you know, well into the six figure of, you know, experience and knowledge if somebody could do all of those things. So it's really just this problem of trying to put out these fires and people panicking and just trying to find these unicorns. And the best thing I can say to this is apply. You got to get out there. I've talked to a lot of people who, you know, have you know, they don't feel confident in their skills to go out there and put themselves out there. And I'm a proponent for putting yourself out there, going to interviews and failing, because that's a learned skill. You got to get out there, you got to fail to know how to improve. And you know, the reality is that they're looking for unicorns, but they're settling for realistic. And if you don't put your name out there, you're not going to get that opportunity. And I think one of the other big things that's happening in this industry that's sort of playing in part to what we're seeing here is that COVID has sent vast majorities of people from their office space where they were in a security environment that was monitored. They had IT support staff that could physically walk up to the machine, triage it, and deal with that problem. We're now dealing with everybody working from home or remotely. And there's a huge struggle and there's a big gap in visibility. I cannot see or monitor those endpoints that are at home, and many employees are using their personal computers. So there's a privacy issue. There's all of these other issues that, you know, sort of compounded by that. that really limits the ability for these businesses to do something about security. You know, they could have their checklist saying these are the things we want to accomplish, but we just can't due to COVID. Everybody's remote, everybody's using their, you know, their assets at home. So it's just expounding the problem.
Yeah. And
Especially at home with that personal computer, it's just a security risk because you can get emails from
Yeah,
anyone at that. It's not through a monitored gateway as like a work computer would be.
right, and
absolutely.
a lot of it was assembled so quickly on the fly, just like we need everyone to be working at home. Let's just put together some VPNs and patch some connections over and hope for the best. And I think we saw that in some of the numbers that the incidents are just rapidly increasing as a result. But it kind of also sounds like we need to just sort of eliminate all the images of cute cats out there. And I think we might be reducing a lot of the spam emails and images out there. But I mean, like on a more serious note, like when you see the numbers that we're talking about, like for the audience out there, CyberSeek's a pretty good resource to sort of get a bit of an idea of how many vacancies are out there. But at least from the US perspective, you know, we're seeing 521,000 unfilled cybersecurity jobs. And you can see from a heat map essentially where those jobs are located. And, you know, I think a lot of this it's sort of a catch up, right? It's because security has always been that big afterthought, and it's only really become apparent in the past several years. All of these roles are essentially, I wouldn't say all of them, but maybe a good majority of them are roles that should have existed in the first place and should have been filled and should have had some kind of pipeline from students in high school and being introduced to cybersecurity and then taking further learning and so forth, right? As one potential option, as a bit of a catch up. But then there's a catch-22. We didn't really know that threat surface, like how many incidents were out there and what the vulnerabilities really were, right? So sort of like a catch-22 chicken and the egg scenario. But essentially that's why like we're teaching some of that stuff. We're seeing more courses. We're seeing people online teaching this stuff as some kind of stopgap. So I guess if anyone's listening, I definitely encourage you to, if you do have an interest in this stuff, now is probably a good time. You definitely want to get yourself involved. It's pretty exciting stuff. Yeah.
Definitely
There's
can
definitely a
always use
need.
more.
Yeah.
More and more analysts, the more the merrier.
Yeah. Cool. So that's a little bit of like, you know, talking shop, right? Like that's all the stuff in the industry itself and what we're doing and sort of like a landscape image. Maybe let's sort of pivot over to what's actually currently happening, right? So what is behind those numbers? Why are incidents so high, and what's that $7 billion deficit kind of being highlighted? Well, there was a more recent vulnerability or a series of vulnerabilities that kicked off within the past couple months, and you may have heard of them. There's a group, a threat actor group. They're called Hafnium, or that's what they're referred to as. And we have these very advanced threat actors that are operating in the world. A lot of them are nation state sponsored, or just have a lot of finances, and that's how they're able to perform these very large scale attacks. And what happened was this group went out and essentially took advantage of a series of unpatched systems. And you know, and that was it at the end of the day. And they were able to identify it. They're able to look into deploying a backdoor on all of these servers. And if some of you in your organizations, if you notice maybe your email systems went down or your IT system was sort of scrambling and you have to reset your passwords, a lot of that was related to this. Email servers globally were completely compromised with a backdoor that permitted these threat actors to get inside and then perform full scale attacks on the server itself and actually pivot to other systems inside of that network. And they had full administrative access. So you know this breach is actually still ongoing. A lot of it was sort of patched and caught within the past month, but a lot of it wasn't. And the interesting thing here, and I think it's getting a lot of buzz, is this is the first time now that we're actually seeing that the FBI has now stepped in. So they're looking into this and they're stepping in and they are remotely going in and patching and fixing organization servers. So that's the equivalent of like if you owned a store and it kept getting robbed and it had some kind of impact on the neighborhood, the cops would come by and be like, "We're actually going to patch up and fix your store for you because you're not doing anything." It's a really interesting thing right now, you know?
Yeah, I think to understand sort of the criticality of what's going on is many businesses, pretty much all businesses nowadays, need email, and a typical trait of how these servers are set up is they need to be connected directly to the internet. So these vulnerabilities allowed an adversary to essentially scan the whole internet, identify all vulnerable mail servers, which was pretty much all of them, because this exploit was referred to as a 0-day, meaning it wasn't publicly disclosed. It was unknown to the vendors until after the attacks had started. But these adversaries were able to compromise all of these email servers and, like Anthony said, put these persistent backdoors into the servers. And what that essentially means is they use the technology, I mean, not really a technology, a technique referred to as a web shell. And it's literally a piece of code that can be triggered remotely to do various commands. They can run remote commands on these servers. But it was persistent because the file persisted on the computer, whether the computer was rebooted or, even after a software update, the web shell would persist, so that it provided this remote access to these adversaries. And the real big thing here, I think the takeaway is that a lot of small businesses struggle to maintain their systems. And the challenge with these email servers is they have something called cumulative updates. It's these hot patches that Microsoft releases, and you have to do them regularly. You can opt not to, and unfortunately, many people went that route. And the problem is when a vulnerability is disclosed, such as this, and they say, "Hey, we have a fix. Download and patch your system." The problem is, if you have not been updating your system with all of those cumulative updates, you now have to do all these patches, which in many cases took a few days. And there was a lot of noise around this, in that the patches were bricking systems, causing the systems to crash. The patch would not successfully install. So they would believe they patched the system to only find out it did not work and they were still vulnerable. So there was a lot of issues with that. And that sort of led up to the FBI. This breach was pervasive enough, it was persistent enough, and it was damaging enough that the Department of Justice gave provisional authority to the FBI to begin remoting into random US businesses' mail servers and deleting these persistent web shells to try to clean it up and fix things. So that brings a lot of discussions about privacy and the boundaries of law enforcement. But I totally respect that. But at one hand, I have to say, if you are incapable of keeping your systems up to date, and your systems are being used as a launching pad to attack other organizations, that really is a clear delineation when a higher power, such as the FBI, needs to get involved. And really, the takeaway from this is a lot of these businesses need to have somebody else manage those systems. They need to go to a cloud provider or get somebody to manage these systems and keep them up to date, because unfortunately, they're not doing the best job out there. And there's still many systems that are out there and unpatched. So this is an ongoing thing.
Well, what's interesting is I've actually heard from a lot of people that they're kind of happy that the FBI is getting involved. That's sort of like an extra layer of support from the government, being like, we're with you in this as well too. We understand the situation. But there's also there's the other side of the coin too, Greg, that you're talking about, right? Like, what level of privacy is now actually being sort of breached, right? The government has to step in, and without authorization or consent, I should say, right? Like, this is just something that's happening in the back end. They're stepping in and they're able to solve these things and sort of just take over for your lack of security program. It's really interesting, right?
It opens up a lot of doors. I mean, you think criminal cases. I mean, if the FBI can remote into your personal equipment that's owned by your business, that's under, a sovereign legal entity, like what, how does that change in the future? How is that precedent used for other things? I approve of how it's being used now, but it could be used for unwanted activities in the future.
Yeah. Really crazy. I'm looking forward to seeing how this sort of unravels further from here. Next one that we wanted to sort of talk about, and this is more food for thought, everything that we're saying out here, right? So take everything we're saying, maybe think on it, dwell on it, and feel free to comment as well too if you got any ideas. We're happy to discuss some of the points you might be thinking of. There was another incident more recently too, from the vendor called Ubiquity, and what they provide is a lot. Actually, what a lot of people are very familiar with is that they provide a lot of wireless access points and different types of Wi-Fi equipment for home residential support. That they have some really good products actually, and a lot of people do prefer them for ease of access, setting it up, configuration. It really improves the overall signal at home as well too, and it's really not that expensive. Now, what happened was there was a report a couple months back that a third party cloud service provider that provides control over some of your products and services had an incident, and customer data was potentially interacted with, but it wasn't really explained much further than that. And there was a suggestion about you should go out there and reset your credentials. And that was that. It didn't really go much further. People probed. There was a little bit of discussion happening at the time. And then what happened, interestingly enough, and this is what I was saying, like in the beginning of this whole webinar, is that things are seeming, all these incidents are actually unraveling a little differently now. And so what we saw is that a couple months in, there was apparently a whistleblower allegedly working inside, or to some degree has connections, and was able to report on just the scale of the breach, that it was actually much more significant, and that this third-party cloud service provider, which essentially was actually just Amazon Web Services, which provides a lot of cloud services for a lot of the infrastructure out there, someone had gotten access into the account of someone from Ubiquiti who actually has access at a level of administrative access to the cloud services, which in effect allowed access to source code, cryptographic keys, user logs, and databases. And then what was even more interesting was that the response that we saw from the industry and from Ubiquiti's side was that they could neither really confirm nor deny the facts. They just simply said that there was no evidence that this actually took place. They didn't deny it any further. And there's a lot of back and forth going on right now, and stating that, well, they couldn't really deny that this happened because there wasn't anything in place from an auditing perspective, like having an actual security auditing policy to see who's interacting with what users touching which piece of data. That wasn't out there. So I think this is going to unravel a little bit more, but we're definitely going to find out just the extent of how much was accessed. But we sort of have to assume at this point, like a worst case scenario, right? We have to go in, change our account passwords at every level, and look for further compromises, further breaches.
Yeah, I think one of the things I didn't like about this was the term third party. That really is misleading, and it's an attempt by Ubiquiti to pass liability and blame to some unnamed third party, which we know is Amazon Web Services. And for those who aren't aware, Amazon Web Service is like the largest cloud provider in the world, and a vast majority of the websites and applications and things we use every day are run on AWS's architecture. And that's Amazon, like the place we go buy stuff and get it shipped to your house the next day. But my beef with this is Amazon has what's called a shared security policy. And what that means is they say it's our responsibility to protect the core infrastructure, the cabling, the facilities. They have guards and gates and redundant backup and power. They do data replication, so if there's least likely of data being lost, they do all of these efforts to protect and secure the core services and architecture that makes up AWS. But the shared part of this is me as a user, which Level Effect does make use of AWS services. We host all of our courses, and we host virtual machines and other assets that we attack and play with on AWS. And it's our responsibility to secure our account. We have to have strong password policies. We need to do auditing of what roles are allowed to access what services. And if we're not doing that, we're not living up to our side of the deal. And what really this boils down to is Ubiquiti was trying to basically just lay blame to AWS, when in fact they weren't doing what they needed to do to protect their accounts. And this really allowed an adversary using potentially stolen credentials to access the account and steal this information as it was stored in AWS. So that was my big beef. And secondly, I'm a Ubiquiti user. Their equipment is fantastic. I have basically enterprise grade hardware at my house. I was not at home when this happened. I was out of town. So when I got back, flew back home, I was annoyed that I had to disable my remote monitoring. I had to change all my passwords on my stuff. That's just a necessary evil of today's age. But I guess this hit personally to me because this protects my home, and this is the core infrastructure. And if my infrastructure is compromised, you really can't trust your network anymore. That's the same thing as I'm going to go use the internet at Starbucks. You can't trust that infrastructure. You don't know who monitors, manages it, and maintains it. So you can't have any implied trust. Because I manage it and maintain it, I have implied trust. But when I hear that it's been breached, right, like everything goes out the window, I had to come back, clean everything up, change passwords. I reviewed all my logs and looked at things and didn't see anything suspicious. But I feel bad for those who don't have the skills to really assess those things and respond to it in an appropriate amount of time. And that's really where customers are left, holding all the problems that have to be fixed. If Ubiquity's not really taking ownership of this and they're blaming a third-party cloud provider, then that means they're not helping customers. And I certainly didn't get anything from Ubiquity telling me what I needed to do. So this was just an example of how not to support your customers through a breach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Interesting. So with that being said, covering some of those incidents, if we sort of look at what could have been done, I think, Greg, you and I were sort of just ping-ponging before and saying, well, if we really look at it and sort of demystifying these massive incidents that just took place, a lot of them could have been prevented by some really simple security practices, right?
Yeah. So in cyber, it's referred to as basic cyber hygiene. There's roughly 10 or so things that you'd want to do. I don't remember more than 4 things off the top of my head. That's why I'm a faithful user of Google. But just looking at some of these breaches, it really comes down to patching and keeping your systems updated. Now, the problem with the Hafnium breach is that it was a 0-day, meaning the exploit existed prior to there being a patch. So there's really not much we can do about 0 days until we get a patch. And that's really one of the biggest fears of organizations that do generally have a good security program. 0 days are always, we always are learning about them. So that's just a reality, and we do our best to mitigate. And the key with a 0-day is responsiveness. Disclosure to taking action is paramount to how damaging it can be. And a lot of organizations, if they're not patching at all, that means they're not paying attention to what's going on. So patching your systems, keeping them up to date, it's just, you got to do it. Don't skip your updates on your systems. And then secondly, looking at a Ubiquity, auditing your assets. And this really comes down to what accounts are provisioned, what do they have access to, and are they authorized to access these things? Accounting and authorization of resources is really just the next big step of this. And those are really, really fundamental cybersecurity strategies. Regardless if you go to college, a webinar, or like a boot camp, that's pretty much one of the first things you're going to be taught is just some of the foundational cyber hygienes. It's like day one material. And unfortunately, having seen many organizations, cyber hygiene is probably the most least implemented set of solutions at organizations. They really overlook a lot of those things. And a lot of people in the community, not the cyber community, but the people who are trying to secure themselves, think security means buying products and turnkey solutions and spending money. And security is as much of an art as it is a science. And the art of it is, how do you mold security to support the needs of a business? Because if you don't do that, people are going to circumvent it. It's not going to work for the business. It's going to waste money, and you're still going to get breached. You're still going to get hacked. So really the fundamentals and being in consideration of how the business operates are 2 of the biggest things that any organization can do. And unfortunately, many organizations don't go through those exercises, and we get to sort of this thing here. It's too many times. Last year, just there was a large security vendor that got compromised. I think it was a Russian advanced threat compromised them. And one of the compromises in some of the information that came out of it was that their password was pretty much guessable. It was like name of the company 1234. Like that was a password on like a core server. And the adversaries literally just guessed the password, logged into the system, and had their way with it. So the fundamentals are just not fundamental. We should stop calling them fundamentals. They should be like, this is what you do. And they're not some fundamental thing that you can push to next month. They got to be done today.
Yeah, exactly right. It's not the super advanced, very intricate aspects of security that seem to be the problem. It's
Yeah.
it's the basics. So maybe the basics aren't the basics. So you
Yeah.
have to break it apart.
Everybody wants to get into cybersecurity to be a hacker and like find like nation states. And that's like the 0.001% edge case. The vast majority of this is users clicking things they shouldn't, getting little pieces of malware that are annoying. They're not too damaging to the organization. And it just takes time. It's just a resource drain on the organization and the people who have to respond to those. And there's folks out there like John who look at a lot of this and have to deal with it all the time. So he's got a lot of experience with that.
My favorite thing about the basics is that you always see the pictures where it says security budget before the breach, and it's like $3. Security budget after the breach, and it's like $1 million stack.
Oh yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
just the truth of it. Most companies will not put a lot of money towards their security budget until after they've had a breach. And those basics that you were talking about are just ignored because there's nobody looking into it. And
Yeah,
that's
security's
really a big thing about it.
Yeah, security is very reactionary, unfortunately, and it's until something bad happens. It's nobody thinks about it like insurance. Like we've got to buy it, we got to have it to protect our family, and we hope we never use it. People are like, oh, we're doing fine, we're secure. Oh, we were hacked. How much does it cost? And everything's 10 times more once you've been breached. So it's better to be proactive and get things squared away sooner rather than later.
So I guess if I can sort of sum it up, with what Greg and John are kind of saying over there too, right? Is if you're that end user right now, if you're someone that isn't even in security industry, maybe you're like your day to day, keep yourself updated, patch your systems. So when you get those Windows updates, make sure you're applying them, and keep sort of like an inventory if you can of what you have put your password out to, what sort of maybe wireless access points you have at home, and sort of what's going on inside your network. And then if maybe you're starting off in the industry, some of the first things you should do to sort of support the company you work for is identify what basics are missing in sort of in that security program. And maybe you can do some large impact right there. And I think what we can do now is actually get John Brennan over here to sort of demonstrate essentially what some of those basics are. So now we're going to put him to the test, and let's see exactly how hard those basics really are, if he can do it. And we're going to put him
Sweet.
through a scenario. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it off to him, and he's going to walk you through what I would say is a bit more of a common scenario.
Cool. This is gonna be fun.
So while John's getting that set up, I wanted to also add, I think Alejandra asked a question about sort of like the paths to this industry. And where was it? Yeah, so aside from, the common certifications, Net Plus, Sec Plus, what do you recommend for someone who has no university degree and just getting started in IT? It really depends on what you want to do. If you want to be in the public sector, working in the government, a degree is still pretty much a requirement nowadays. Government really holds on to the value of a four-year degree, and I'm not personally saying I don't think there's value in it, but they're really big sticklers about it. I worked in the government as someone in the military, and I was able to get my degree by the time I left, but I knew military members who had spent 20 years doing awesome work, fantastic work, and they retired and they couldn't get a job that was a position that was open doing the exact same thing they had done for literally 20 years. And the reason was you don't have a degree. So it was a really big head scratcher. But when it comes between college and a boot camp, and this isn't, trying to upsell our boot camp, go anywhere. I really feel the short-term value is in a boot camp, because boot camps are designed by nature to provide practical and applicable skills. And when I talked previously about organizations, they're dealing with risk and they're trying to hire people. What they're hiring you for is a solution. You are a resource that can bring solutions to their problems, and their problems are in the form of risk and what they're dealing with. So having demonstratable skills to bring to the table is very impactful. And on another note, I have personally dealt with and taught many students who went and got a 4-year degree, comp sci, or IT security, or a few of the others that escape me right now. And they've struggled. They went and got the degree. They did what they thought they needed to do, and the interviews basically were like, so what practical skills do you have? Well, college is really great for preparing on theory, writing papers, management, time management, and learning, the foundational knowledge of how all this stuff works. But without those practical skills, it's really hard for an organization to take that person on when they're dealing with like real malware, real breaches that are happening right now. They're struggling to bring somebody on and train them appropriately. So that's just sort of like the big caveat and problem with this industry, is there's not a lot of training and on the job upskilling that happens at a lot of companies. They're looking for those unicorns who could just step in the door and save the day, and that's not the reality for what they should be expecting.
I like that answer. And I think that practical assessment of what you were talking about, the difference between, say, Level Effect and a college, is that we do have practical work. We actually put in live work, and we work with live malware, which is, something that you can't say a lot of the times coming straight out of a college. I do agree with you, though. It is hard finding a job without a degree. Me, myself, I don't have a college degree. I just have, my Level Effect, my CDCP. I did not go for the traditional Security Plus, Network Plus. That'll be sometime in the future for me. I will say it's possible to get a job without a degree. It's just going to be a lot harder. And I think that's just the reiteration of what you're saying. It's just, it's great, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword in cyber. It's really hard.
Yeah.
For me, honestly, though, I found it was a lot easier for me to find a job through connections. And the greatest thing about that is, being in Level Effect, meeting the people that I've met through Level Effect, is eventually how I got connected with Huntress and saw that they were a company just by they happen to know each other. And I mean, it's as simple as that. Honestly, even a connection can get you a job faster than a degree can in some cases. So always be looking for those connections. And like Greg said earlier, just put yourself out there. Honestly, I think I applied to maybe 500 jobs the first week after I got my degree. So you just have to keep doing it, keep going.
That's a lot, but yeah.
So we're going
All
to be
right.
jumping in. I have never seen this file before, so we're going to be starting right from the basics. We're going to just run the file and see what's going on. Cool, look at that. Publisher can't be verified. We're going to run it anyways.
So what's happening there, when a publisher's not verified, your computer is trying to help you, but for whatever reason, the developers who wrote these tooltips didn't really put it into a language that the standard user could understand. So when you write software, if you're legitimate, you sign your software with a certificate that's validated by a certificate authority. It's like a trust chain to say, hey, I vouch for so and so ABC company. When your software is unsigned, your operating system cannot corroborate if it's legitimate or not. So I could say, hey, I'm Adobe updater.exe, what we're dealing with right here, and it's saying I can't corroborate that. A legitimate Adobe updater should be signed and would be corroborated, so you wouldn't get that pop-up.
That's the first line of defense right there.
Mm-hmm.
Should have caught that, John. Should have caught that. Could have stopped this
Yeah,
whole thing.
why'd you just click the binary, man? That's like rule number one. Don't just click things, but we'll just chalk it up. It's a demo.
We click everything, We'll figure it out eventually. I'm trying to let this load. It's just giving it a second.
Yeah, it's on Internet Explorer.
Looks like running the auto run right away, as you saw what Greg just explained of the publisher. This is bringing us right away to blog.adobe.com. Doesn't look too, suspicious right away, just off the website. I'm gonna wait to see if it loads, see if it does anything here. See if I'm looking for it to download something or not. We'll see. I don't know. Was it supposed to
Maybe.
load past this, Anthony?
Yeah, it's supposed to load it. That's just Internet Explorer. If
Oh,
if
okay.
it defaulted to Chrome or something, it would have loaded.
Do you want me to just copy this and throw it into Chrome?
Sure.
All right, cool.
So essentially, like this little malicious file, what it's doing right now is it's just supposed to sort of make you feel comfortable as a user that it did go to blog.adobe.com, and that is a trusted. It looks like a normal site, that's Adobe's website. So if you ran it, you would have thought, okay, it did something cool. I'll just move on with my day now. Just trying to trick you. But if you have Internet Explorer as your default browser, I guess
Yeah.
you might be tricked. It's the one time it'll come in handy. There you go.
Hey, you
Internet
never
Explorer
know.
saved the day. Yeah.
Internet Explorer.
So there's nothing malicious with opening up that website. That website is the legitimate website. But I think to clarify what Anthony was saying, malware authors, a lot of it is having the skill to write code, but also knowing how to manipulate people, because people are the agents of execution. If I can dupe a user to clicking a link or running a binary like we got John to do, that's the first part of the battle, right? You have to keep that ruse going so that you can be undetected. So by having a pop-up that goes to something legitimate, or having a tooltip that comes up that says, hey, you're all updated, that user feels like, okay, cool, the update worked, and they're going to go about their day not realizing that it was in fact malware.
Sweet. So, since I just ran something, and although it doesn't look malicious, if I'm a little bit more of a suspicious user and I just think, hey, I just want to make sure that nothing is running on the back end of my computer without me knowing, I'm going to go ahead and open Task Manager. This is usually just like a nice first step you can take to see what background processes are running on your computer. Sometimes it'll have a different view, and then you'll just click Advanced View, and that's where you'll get to where I am right now. So we're just gonna see, right now we have Google Chrome running, Internet Explorer and Task Manager. That's not too shady because we know that they're up. And we're just gonna kind of look through here. It looks like we have 16 background processes. And I just wanna make sure everything is looking right, because we're gonna be making sure nothing's running in the background without our permission. These are all, Windows things that will run in the background. We also have services and performance to look through. This is just, we'll show you what your computer's doing, see how it's actually running. Perfect. Now we are going into this detail section. I'm just gonna see if we can find anything. Since we already know this file name, I'm gonna look for something similar to it. It doesn't mean that this is exactly what's gonna pop up. It just means that it's a baseline for me to start and to know. So Task Manager is just gonna show us, is this still actively running somewhere? Or if we see anything suspicious running. Nice.
Some pretty good malware.
Yeah, pretty hidden. We'll see. And this is all the services currently running on your computer right now when you have this. Oops. Oh. I'm going to do this real quick. Sorry about that. Awesome. So we're just gonna keep on looking. I scrolled down a little bit too fast for myself. And like I said, this is really just to give us a baseline. This is just stuff that we're looking for, anything to kind of just pop up and see what's going on.
So, if you're just like a regular user, a lot of this stuff might seem kind of weird to you. You might not even know what to look for. John's obviously a little bit more skilled. He can go through this and his eye can pick it apart. He's not seeing anything. And, to kind of give a little bit of it away, he's not going to find anything here. So that's why he's looking through it.
Fun.
So he's doing the right things. He just can't see it. And that's the intention.
So This may not be known to the regular user, but a lot of the files will end up generating somewhere else. For me, in my day-to-day job, I usually see if I run some kind of malware, a lot of it's going to be dumped into some kind of temp folder. So since I ran this file, I still think it's okay, but I'm still really not sure. I'm just going to see if anything was created without going into any tools. I'm just going to check out the local disk, and then should be a users tab. So a lot go under the default. Some can be under administrator. So I'm just going to check default first, just in case. And let's see. Biggest thing to remember is most things will be going into the temp folder. So this is where you're going to find most of like any created malware. That's why I like to actively check it, just because anything can be dumped in there. And we have nothing in there. So perfect. We're looking good.
What we want you to think, John. You're looking good. Nothing's wrong.
I'm gonna open Teams and bring that to my other browser too. Perfect. There we go. I just want to
So
make
much
sure.
worse that I have this red background and I'm like the evil voice. Like just
I love it. I love it. Okay, so now that we checked through the temp folder, we're still going to be in default for right now, just because, you know, we want to make sure, because not only does they go to the temp, they go to app data. I mean, it could literally just appear in this folder default. Right now, we're not seeing that as we look, so I'm just going to check the app data. I always like to check local before anything. And it seems that we got something in here. It's a weird little text file. Okay, so none of these were edited. Perfect. But we see that this file right here, this 4/15/2021, this date modified, if you click this twice, or maybe 3 times, there it is. Perfect. So it'll go by folder. So now I can see that this is filtered. This looks like it's been edited today around 5:01 a.m. The time difference is a little off, but we can see, I'm going to be looking through here. I'm going to look for that same thing. I'm going to see if anything's been modified today. I see that everything's in here, but nothing looks too crazy. Awesome. So now I'm not really seeing anything. And as an end user, if you don't know this, there's a tool set called the Sysinternal Suite. It's completely free from Microsoft and you can download it. And it's really cool because now I can't see anything going on in these folders, obviously. So my first thought is going to be, as an analyst, to run it against Procmon so I can see what processes it's taking to create it. But I'm also going to open autoruns exe as well, so that I can see if any persistence method is being created. So I'm just going to minimize that for now and go on to Procmon first. Awesome. And the file is called adobe_updater.exe. So I'm going to add a filter. So this is a tool called Procmon I was just talking about. It basically allows us to filter by a file or any certain thing and see all kinds of activity like the registry, file system, network activity, threat activity, and profiling events. So right here, I'm going to go to filter. This is a process. It's an executable. So sorry. So here we go. Process name is adobe_updater.exe. Sorry. And I'm going to add that. So now we see that this filter's here. I'm going to click OK. Right now you see it's empty. That's totally fine. That's how I want it to be. Because now I'm going to run this again. I'm going to click this whole run again. It's going to go through the whole process of bringing me to the website like we just did before. But now you can see all of these events are slowly starting to filter themselves in. So we
also
see.
keep in mind, sorry, just to let everyone know out there too, John, that if you were, I mean, what John's doing right now, if he was doing this in a real environment, he would sort of sandbox this and take it out. He wouldn't run the binary again as a user and just try to like infect his computer further. This is more for demonstration purposes, just for him to walk through it.
Yep, perfect. Glad you said something. Which actually, while we're doing this, since you said about sandboxing, that does remind me. So there is a website called VirusTotal, and it is a little bit of a sandbox as well. And if you don't know what that file is that you're running, I think I can just do it from the desktop.
Mhm.
Here we go. So I'm going to throw Adobe Updater.exe. VirusTotal kind of looks at the hashes and the binaries, and it'll compare them, and it'll go through a lot of different security vendors like antivirus products, and they will scan it and try to see, you know, have they seen it before? Is this malicious or not? So I'm just going to confirm this upload, and then I'm going to go back into Procmon where we just were, and while this uploads, and see if anything comes out of it. Perfect. So right away, if we can see that it's doing some registry stuff, nothing too out of the ordinary yet. I'm just gonna kind of look through a little bit. It's creating some files. We've got conhost getting created. I don't see anything too crazy, too out of the ordinary, but what I want to look at now is perfect. So I'm going to look at the file system activity. I just want to see if it's creating anything, if it's opening anything, just like what we were looking at, just basically without all of the extra registry values and everything.
Essentially removing all the noise, right? We just want to focus on file activity.
Exactly.
So a lot of people who are sort of new to this stuff think like, how do you know what's good, what's bad? Because, you know, when you're not really used to this type of stuff, everything starts to look bad. And really it comes down to training and exposure, right? Training only gets you so far, but really exposure, seeing common files, the .NET framework, those are all things that we would expect to see. Because I'm seeing a lot of .NET stuff, this was probably written in C#, the binary, right? So you can see whenever you write code, some malware is really advanced and they'll include in the code everything that the code needs. It won't rely on the system, but more often than not, software and malware will utilize the things that already exist on the operating system. It'll use these dependencies, so the author doesn't have to reinvent the wheel and write it from scratch. So by doing that, they can rely on what exists, and from an analysis perspective, we can start to understand, you know, generally what it might have been written in or what it's doing based on the dependencies and the libraries it consumes or it's trying to interact with.
Perfect. Yeah. Well said, honestly. So I'm transitioning back into VirusTotal right now. I'm letting Procmon load a little bit more. But now we can see it has a threat level score of 6 out of 68, and we have FireEye and Bitdefender, which are two bigger antivirus companies out there, so they're a little more trusted. I'm not sure why this cap's just coming up now, but you know, let me just get through the stairs real quick. You can still see this, right, Greg?
Yep.
I just want to make sure. Cool. So we have a couple of these that are saying, you know, maybe this is bad. We have a Zemsif, but those are really just generic terms. When they don't know what to call a malware, we see that this file is not signed. It's saying that it is copyrighted 2021 Adobe Updater.exe. But we can also look up this file too if we wanted to. We could Google this to get more information on this file itself, but since we already have the VirusTotal and we know that it's malicious for sure, we can just keep going. Open Proc Explorer 2, get that running. And then now that I've ran this twice, hopefully we have some kind of persistence. This is our auto runs tab that I was telling you about. It is where all footholds can be seen pretty much if this malware is going to be persistent, if it's going to keep itself on this computer after rebooting it, we'll find it in here. A lot of the times you'll find them in like scheduled tasks or anything else. So we just want to make sure that we find something so that if we do reboot this host, this malware will be gone by the time we do. So I thought this 3000 is interesting, but I wonder, oh no.
Would you say, John, this is sort of similar to what you do in the field as well, to some degree?
So I actually love working with the sysinternal suite. I use the sysinternal suite for almost all my investigations to create a baseline, at least, of where everything's going, what's being created, because it makes it a lot easier when you have something like Procmon and you can just filter by the registry activity. Because if you have a just really nasty piece of malware, you're going to see everything that it's creating, everything it's opening. So you're going to know exactly what to defend. And that's why I love these tools, because even though it's a lot of information to look at once, it gives you pretty much everything you need to know.
Cool.
Oh,
Wanna
looks like
cover
this
that
was
briefly.
updated today. I'm just kidding. Okay. Oh, you guys got a nice piece of malware for me, huh?
Mhm.
Hiding itself very well. Oh, wow. I'm not really finding anything, but I'm gonna go one by one this time and see. So on these little tabs, you guys, you can see each thing that I was just looking at. This is everything. This is just how you go step by step. So this is like on log on. What is this gonna do? When it starts up, what's gonna happen? So that's the first thing I want to look at. It says, oh, here we go. Here's the persistence. I was gonna say this says it's updated, but I didn't see this on the first shot. And that's why I like to go through one by one just in case I miss something like that. So it looks like it's placing itself in the HKCU, which is the registry current user. Microsoft Windows current version run, and look at that. Users default app data local temp Adobe updater.exe.
No,
So I'm
don't
gonna
look there, John.
So now I'm gonna go back, users, or what did it say? Sorry. Users default app data local temp. Perfect. So it was near us.
You were close to it.
Mhm.
I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing here. All right, perfect. A little forgetful when I'm going back and forth. I feel like this directory was a lot more full before this. But okay, so now we have this application and a text document. I'm gonna just open this guy up. I mean, usually if I was on a VM, I could open this up without having a worry. Especially since it's a text file. Not a lot of things are going to be happening with it, but you do need to be careful if you're going to even open text files, and I would suggest sandboxing it on VirusTotal before doing anything with it, so at least you know what you're getting into. Cool. Now I just want to read this. Fun stuff.
Looks like it's doing host enumeration, gathering information about the host.
Seems to be so. Well, look
Mhm.
at that. We have a link. I'm going to copy this link. I'm going to still keep reading through it, but I'm just going to copy this so when I'm done, I can run it through a URL scanner.
Looks like it's repeating itself.
Yep, the same thing again.
You did run it twice.
Mhm.
Is that a different link? Yeah, it is. Cool. We have two links. Maybe it was just generated by running it twice, but we'll see. I'm not sure why this is not going to let me just go back to the beginning, but we'll just type it in again. There we go. So under this URL tab, I just copied that URL. So we see that pastebin.com that was in the text file we found in the app data local temp folder. So I'm just going to scan this on VirusTotal. Seems clean here, but I'm going to go an extra step into this and use my other favorite website, which is Hybrid Analysis. Hybrid Analysis is like an online virtual sandbox for both files and URLs. You can also search by hash just like on VirusTotal as well. You just either drag the file where you just saw it said drag and drop the file, or you just pop in a URL. I'm just gonna leave these to be private. This, if you click this section, anyone in the community can have access to your sandbox and just see the file. And sometimes I just like to keep it private just because you don't want anything going everywhere and people finding these malwares and seeing them and trying to write off of them. So I'm gonna let that run for a minute. It seems like this one's fine. But then I'm just gonna do one more. This is the last one. I like this one as well, urlscan.io. It's kind of similar to Hybrid Analysis and VirusTotal in the sense that it does sandbox it a little bit, but usually it'll show you a picture of it, and it seems that the domain is on the blacklist. So we have a bad URL here. I almost kind of just want to enter it into Google, but I feel like it's going to download something if I do that. So
Have you interacted with Pastebin before?
not too much. That's what I'm trying to figure out at this moment right now, because Pastebin I don't see as much on a day-to-day basis as everything else.
Pastebin, by its namesake, is a place where we can paste information. Typically, in the past, it's been a place where a lot of adversaries have pasted evidence of them breaching. Like, you know, a threat actor group would say, "Hey, we hacked company X," and then, you know, people would say, like, "Prove it." So they'd go to Pastebin and they would paste a bunch of like insider documents and things to sort of show it. It's also used to dump information. But a lot of malware lately is making use of common websites and social services like Slack, Teams, Google Drive, and things for command and control. And command and control is how a malware is controlled remotely, right? You have one small team of hackers or one malware author, and he wants to compromise many machines. They'll use a command and control server to control the behaviors of their malware across a large subset of deployed victims. So to hide and obfuscate that traffic, sometimes they'll actually have the malware talk to, say, Google Drive or Dropbox, or talk to Slack, and they'll actually run commands in a private Slack channel that the malware will respond to and do various tasks. So you should be pretty good to just run that thing to Pastebin.
Yeah, and with the VirusTotal saying that it's clean, I think, you know, that gives you a little bit extra. So this
We're
might have
checking.
happened because I ran it twice. I can put the
Yeah.
second link in, sorry. I think that's probably what happened here.
Yeah, just for some spoiler on it, there is a timer expiry on it, so you might, if you run it again, the whole idea is that if we were able to just like quickly triage it without us kind of talking as we went through, and you're looking and following up and say, I'm gonna go check out that link now, you'll see
Yeah, I'll
some,
run it real quick.
yeah, because we sort of paused and talked through some of the steps. But the tactic here was that you know, some host enumeration was performed, some actual information from the system itself was uncovered, and then it was dumped online to another site, and then obviously disappeared really quickly, so that another step perhaps of exfiltration could have taken place, and then covering up the tracks so that that URL doesn't even exist anymore.
Sweet, so now this should theoretically, if I open this again in a second, I'm gonna close all these because we've already seen it just keeps bringing us to blog, and with Internet Explorer, it's just gonna keep doing the same thing. I'm gonna give this a refresh in a second. Back out. All right, now theoretically this should pop up again. Here we go. Perfect. Brand new link. And as you saw, it completely changed the text file again. So now we only see it going once. The other one is gone, I guess. Fair enough. Sweet.
There we go.
Hmm.
Interesting. So this is pretty much everything that we were just seeing. Some more host enumeration.
So I think one thing to bring up is it's nice that antivirus 6 of 68 told us that this was malicious. That's also concerning, right? That 62 of them were undetermined or thought it was clean. So this malware was written by us, and that's sort of the problem. That's the weakest link with antivirus. Antivirus is really good with known threats, known malware, but there's roughly 300,000 new variants of malware created every day. So there's a large attack vector. There's a lot of threats that exist out there that antivirus just isn't suited for dealing with. So although some detected, the vast majority, this binary would easily run and execute past some of those other antivirus vendors. And that really goes into, how do we determine something is malicious? Well, excuse me, like what John did, looking at how it behaves, how it persists, what files is it accessing, what information is it gathering. I mean, posting to Pastebin, that's Adobe is legitimately never going to do that. Adobe would more than likely have signed updaters, really looking for unsigned software that has persistence, that is doing questionable network activity to unknown servers or services. That's really where we start to determine something's malicious. Going beyond that, having somebody who has the skill at reverse engineering would take a binary like this and they would reverse engineer how it was written and what its true intent is. This, what we're doing here, is essentially a dynamic analysis. We run it to see what it does, but we only know as much as what it showed us. There could be hidden functionality in this binary that we haven't observed yet. Whereas a reverse engineer could go in and basically pick this apart to understand everything that it's capable of. And through that whole process, we determine, you know, hey, this is malicious. But I would say what it's doing now, I would comfortably say this is not legitimate piece of software. How damaging is it? How at risk the organization is from this infection? We can't really determine that yet, but we definitely know that this is something that's unwanted and shouldn't be here. What are your thoughts on that, John?
Oh no, I definitely agree. I mean, a lot of the what analysis is just having the experience of seeing something so many times. And like Greg was explaining earlier when he said that a lot of this may seem like normal to you, or maybe it seems like mumbo jumbo, for half of what was in, the auto runs and everything, all those files that were legit, but how do you know that? A lot of that just comes with experience, and Google is honestly your friend. My favorite thing to say is, I don't judge an analyst by the amount of information they have in their head. I judge an analyst based on their ability to find the answer when asked a question. And I think that's the most important part. It doesn't matter if you can remember all of this and regurgitate it 100% every time. If you can find the answer yourself with every time, that is going to be way more important than having to memorize all of these all the times. And that's the greatest part about, being in this field. We have Google as a resource. And since the cyber community is so huge now, and we're still looking for more people, when you get on things like Twitter and LinkedIn and everything like that, you stay informed and up to date so that when you're looking at things like these, you know what to look for. But for this one specifically, now that we see that it's doing host enumeration, like Greg said, we don't really know how bad it is, but at least we know where it's creating and what it's created so that we can efficiently remove this. So we saw that it created itself in the HKCU. We saw that it created a text file in the app data local temp folder, and also it created its own file path in the app data local temp folder instead of instead of just being on the desktop. So now I mean, Greg, if you don't care, we can start removing this thing from the host.
I would love to. I mean, we could stick around and do that, but we've ran out of time. So I wanted to open it up to Q&A. You could be doing that in the background, and if people want to ask questions about what you're doing, happy to address those. But I wanted to give people an opportunity to ask any questions if there were any. If not, I just wanted to say thank you again for coming to this webinar. And a little shameless plug here, our next boot camp starts May 3rd, and we are working diligently on our penetration testing course to hopefully have out this early summer. That all depends on how much sleep Anthony gets for the next 3 months. But look forward, we're gonna have more webinars in the future, more technical demos and things of that nature. And again, thank you for your time. And if anybody wants to stay around and have a Q&A, happy to sit around and answer a few questions.
Greg, do you know where the little search bar is on this for Foundry? I can't search. I'm just trying to get to regedit.
Oh,
hit Windows R.
yeah, Windows key R. I think it should go.
Nice. Oh, did that really just do it for my computer? It might
Hit run
have.
on your host.
Yeah, it did. It did. Let's try it in here.
Yeah. You can just start typing right away once you open up the Windows key, I think.
Can't really.
Thank you, Jose.
I'll just try it in here once I open it. Oh, I think you're right, Anthony. I think that's gonna work.
Just start searching regedit.exe. Boom.
Boom. Awesome. So what you guys didn't see me do a second ago, I removed both of the shortcuts for that malware off of the desktop, and I also removed it from the app data local temp folder. So now I'm just gonna go back and make sure that that's actually gone. Cool. So I removed them from those folders. And now we did see that there was persistence. So I need to open my friendly auto runs and find where that was again. It's in the HKCU. So I'm going to be looking for this so I can get rid of the persistence so that when we start up this computer again, it's not going to be happening. So HKey current user, that is HKCU. And then I'm going to actually just minimize this pretty close to me so I can see it. Software Microsoft, perfect. So we see this in Software Microsoft. And then Windows current version run, cool. So this is just gonna help me get to this right away so I don't have to keep looking for it.
The
And here's
registry
Adobe
is
Updater.
Yep, the registry is a local database that's meant to house configuration and other settings that are user and system specific. It's used by applications to remember the state of things. The concept is not similar, but loosely like cookies in our browsers. Cookies keep a history of what we've done in the browser. So when you go to your shopping cart, you know, those products still persist in your shopping cart. So the registry is a database used to store stateful information about applications and user settings, but you can also store links to malicious files. You can store raw binary data. You could put the malicious file right into the database and have it run locally. So there's lots of different ways adversaries use the registry to get persistence, to get something to run or execute to their benefit.
Cool, yeah, I mean, this is the last step right here, honestly. I made sure that it got removed from the registry value. Like you said, it's not gonna come back now that we remove that persistence, and I removed the actual file itself, so I don't think, am I missing anything here? I don't think so.
We didn't see it running in processes, right? So I think that would be the last step, is just to verify if the application is still running. But if it's not running, then you have successfully remediated the box. We don't have a running process. It can't do any more harm. The file has been removed from all traces on disk, and the registry has been cleaned up to not attempt to start that malicious process or application the next time the computer boots. So you've effectively neutered it.
Congratulations, John.
Yeah, it seems to be so. I do not see it running.
Excellent.
Sweet. Yeah, look at that. It's gone. And that is what you do if you download a virus.
Awesome.
I would not recommend people to double click any files they don't know. I think starting off with what John was doing, taking files and running them in VirusTotal and other reputation engines is number one you need to do. But that isn't, as you've seen, that isn't a catch-all. That's not a silver bullet. There's always an implied risk when we download and run software that we don't have implicit trust on or can't verify the originator of that software. So always have to be careful. But again, that's it for this webinar. Thank you for showing up. If there is no questions, we're going to end it shortly.
One question, actually, instead of just responding in the Q&A, we had someone ask, would the IP info on pastebin not be an indicator of a C2 connection? The NP cap reference could even be posting captures to some cloud service.
Where was that question? I didn't see it.
Oh, no. Over there on the Q&A. So I guess, well, my first question is, what do you mean by the IP info and pastebin not being an indicator of a C2 connection? I think pastebin itself is not inherently a malicious C2 agent or a beacon going back and forth, right? So the IP of pastebin itself is actually a fairly trusted domain. It's not normally flagged. There was that one site, I think your URL scan that you ran, John, that flagged it as a blacklisted domain.
Yeah.
And I think more the reason why that's the case is that it does actually prevent this type of exfiltration. So there's no server set up on the box. It wasn't compromised. There was no agent beaconing traffic out per se. There was a process that spawned, enumerated the host, and then just use a normal trusted domain, put that information out into the ether, into the internet, and then it's assumed sort of at the next stage, someone who has access to that pastebin would then take it from there.
Yeah, I think also to add to that, that's what makes this task of securing networks really challenging, because at face value, if I see in my logs something talking to pastebin, right, I immediately go to like insider threat, data leakage. So you're not wrong in having that suspicion that just seeing the domain name should be of interest. But how critical is that in relation to all the other things we're dealing with? Is where the problem comes in. And the challenge is, if you're monitoring DNS traffic to see the name pastebin appear, you then have to pivot and say, well, which host inside my network actually made that request? So that requires a decent amount of visibility. You then have to then corroborate which application is making that call. So we had the benefit of sort of starting from the other end. John knew we had a binary that, obviously is malicious for the purposes of this demonstration. But because we started off with a point in time, like he was checking timestamps, he knew when the binary ran. So he sort of was in cheat mode in that sense, because we knew when it ran, where it ran, and we were able to sort of focus in on that. But in the real world, where we have tens to hundreds to thousands of hosts all running different software, and many organizations not controlling what software is installed, there could be thousands of permutations of what is the baseline in a network. And it's really challenging to whittle through all that noise to then say, aha, it's this Adobe updater that made that pastebin call. And then, that Adobe updater is not signed. It's running out of a temp directory. It's got persistence. It's, none of the things are matching up with what we'd expect. It's really hard to connect all those disparate dots, because network analysis and endpoint analysis are really two different beasts. They're different tools, different log types, different perspectives of the same event. We're looking at the same activity from these different perspectives, and it takes time and skill to sort of put all that back together, right? That forensic analysis, which if you can't do it, it's really pricey to hire somebody to come in and do that type of work for you. But I completely agree with you. Observing those types of domains, we can anecdotally say, if I see connections to these domains, that's higher risk that should be monitored. But the next step, it's easy to say, we'll monitor pastebin. It's harder to then say corroborate malware's talking to pastebin, and it's not a user just visiting it in the browser. That's when things get dicey.
And to sort of even keep it simple too, right? If your organization doesn't have a business case to be using pastebin, why even have access to it in the first place?
Yeah,
right?
blacklist it. That's really the best bet, is just block these domains that you don't trust. So again, that's a great tip. Monitor. If you don't like it, doesn't have a business use case, put it into block mode, stop that activity.
Cool.
All right.
No other further questions. We'll give another minute or so. Otherwise,
did we answer the one that's in the chat from Nathan? It says, can someone please review password database best practices and two-factor authentication methods?
When it comes to database passwords, the old way that was done is the application would have in its code the username and password to literally authenticate on the fly to the database. So what we use now today is we use key stores. There's services that manage secret keys, and they're essentially provisioned to applications when they need to use them. So it's these point in time authentications that are audited. And that way your credentials are not hard coded into software, because if your software is compromised and your credentials are stolen, game over. So that's more of a modern take on what we're doing. These key stores, AWS Cloud uses them. That would have surely helped Ubiquity with their access issues. And then when it comes down to two-factor authentication methods, I'm assuming you're referring to using two-factor authentication in an app you're helping manage or work with, or as an end user? I'll wait to see if you answer that or clarify. But I will say, if you're doing two-factor as a user and you have the option to choose the app, use the app. Don't try to remove all instances of using text-based two-factor authentication. There was a recent article about it, but it's a technique that's been out for some time. You can actually manipulate the signaling, the SS7, the signaling system 7. It's how like old telecommunications architectures have been around since the 70s. And cellular networks tie into SS7, which is your traditional landline, to talk to other telecom networks and such. There have been attacks on that to essentially man in the middle, where I can target a handset and any SMS message sent to that handset I can intercept. So using application-based two-factor authentication is considerably more secure than text-based. There's, like I said to the article, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's actually services where I think they said it was $15. If you knew the phone number, you can copy every SMS sent to any phone number that you knew. So think about how many business emails you receive where they put their personal cell phone at a business. So I want to attack, let's say Bank of America, and I talk to somebody there, and in their, their email footer, they have their personal cell phone. Well, I can pay $15 and now get a copy of every SMS they receive. And what if I figure out their email to, because they posted, I have their email, right? They emailed me, and I start trying to log into Bank of America services, and they do text-based two-factor authentication. I now have that secure token to authenticate as them. So definitely want to use app-based authentication wherever possible.
Yeah, avoid SMS. I just consider SMS a very untrusted channel. Don't put anything out there. I also wanted to piggyback off the password point. Just for general practice, this is beyond database as well too. The transmission of sending a username and password for authentication should be the absolute last use case scenario for any form of any type of authentication, not just databases. There should always be layers and layers of different requests that could happen. And this is something that if you want to design your own software, maybe, or maybe working internally, this is how a lot of modern softwares will do it too. Like when you're authenticating through a website, you put your password in and username, right? You send that out and everything's encrypted. And then there's another channel goes back and forth, and there's a secure token that is then sent back and forth. And there's some more session information. So there's layer upon layer upon layer, so that the username and password is ideally entered only once, not at all. That's sort of the ideal scenario.
To just sort of provide some additional context to that, and I know we're running really long here, but that's referred to like raw key material, right? Like your unencrypted password credentials. That's key material. You want to use derivative key material. So the way you authenticate yourself on a Windows computer or authenticate across the network is your credentials are used to make a cryptographic hash, sort of like a representative of your raw key material. And that's what gets passed over the network. So you're never sharing your raw, like the key, like, you know, like my password 123, that should never be transferred. You would have a derivative key material based on your real password that would be computed on the fly and shared with some authentication service for, you know, authentication and authorization to access that resource. So unfortunately, a lot of web resources and startups and a lot of, you know, developers who don't have a lot of security mindset will collect raw passwords and usernames. And this is why we hear, oh, XYZ company was breached and, you know, passwords were taken from the database. They shouldn't have raw passwords. They should have derivative key material that's used to corroborate your identity. They should have multiple points of data to validate who you are. But that's harder to implement. You know, it's easy to say, harder to do, like anything in security. It's easy to say do the fundamentals until people get involved in business processes and revenue projections, because those things typically take priority over security initiatives, unfortunately.
Yep.
All right. So good questions. Great time. Thank you guys for coming. We're going to end this now. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and not too long from now, a great weekend. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
And thanks to John for coming in here and running the gamut.
Thank you for having me.
I didn't see any sweat.
joining
I didn't see
in.
any sweat show up, so you handled it well, man.
I love live triaging. I'll always mess with anything you give me. I really appreciate you having me on here. It's the
Yeah.
first time I've done something like this on a live webinar, so it was very new for me. I'm glad that we got a nice decent crowd who stayed for a while, and we had some great questions, and you were poking and prodding me. So, I mean, for me, I feel like I've learned some more today, and you know, even just that pay spin scenario. I've worked the pay spin before, but sometimes I just have a complete brain fart. And then I just
Awesome.
forget it exists. So I appreciate
man.
it. Thank you.
All righty. All right. Well, again, thank you. I keep saying thank you, but thank you. All right. That's it. Have a great afternoon.